America owes $36 trillion. That's a stack of $1,000 bills reaching the moon and back 50 times. China? $18 trillion in debt. Japan? They owe twice their entire economy, a debt-to-GDP ratio exceeding 261%. Every single country on Earth is drowning in debt, owing a combined $300 trillion, 3 times what the entire world produces in a year. So then, if everyone owes money, who are they borrowing from? And can this ever be paid back? The answer isn't what you think. And the deeper you dig, the more you realize this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This is about a system so tangled, so dependent on never-ending borrowing, that stopping might collapse everything we know about the modern world. Welcome to the most important financial story no one wants you to understand. The birth of an addiction. Let's start with a simple question. Why does every government on Earth need to borrow money? Can't they just print more? Here's the thing. They could. But the last time countries tried printing unlimited money, we got Venezuela, where a loaf of bread suddenly cost millions. We got Zimbabwe, where people needed wheelbarrows full of cash to buy groceries. When governments print money recklessly, they don't get unlimited wealth. They get hyperinflation and economic collapse. So instead, they borrow. And borrowing comes with rules, with interest payments, with accountability. It forces discipline, or so the theory goes. But something happened along the way. What started as an emergency tool became the foundation of how modern countries operate. Let me show you why. Every government faces the same impossible math problem. Citizens want services, schools, hospitals, roads, military protection. But citizens also hate taxes. Meanwhile, corporations want government contracts, infrastructure, and favorable policies, but they hate paying taxes too. Politicians found the perfect solution. Give everyone what they want without making anyone pay for it. Just borrow the money instead. And for decades, this seemed to work perfectly. Countries could build everything, fund everything, promise everything, and the bill would come due. Someday. Future politicians would figure it out. But here's what nobody talks about, that someday is now. The US government spends more on interest payments than on education and healthcare combined. In 2024 alone, they paid $601 billion just to service existing debt. That's before spending a single dollar on anything useful. The debt trap isn't coming. We're already in it. The circular money machine. Now comes the part that sounds like science fiction, but is absolutely real. Who exactly are we borrowing all this money from? You might think it's China holding America's debt. And sure, China owns about $750 billion of US bonds. But here's the twist. China itself is $18 trillion in debt. Chinese banks hold American debt, while American banks hold Chinese debt, while European banks hold debt from both of them. The entire global financial system has become one massive circular lending operation. But it gets stranger. About 70% of America's debt is actually owed to Americans themselves. When you put money in your bank, that bank buys government bonds. When you pay into your pension fund, that fund buys government bonds. When insurance companies collect premiums, they buy government bonds. So when the government pays interest on its debt, it's essentially paying interest to its own citizens, who then put that money back into the system, which buys more government bonds, earning more interest, in an endless loop. This isn't an accident. This is how the system was designed to work. If this is blowing your mind, you're not alone. The global debt system is one of the most misunderstood topics in economics, and we're just scratching the surface. Hit that like button if you want to see more deep dives like this, and drop a comment with your thoughts. Are we heading for a debt crisis, or is this system actually sustainable? The trap tightens. Here's why countries can't just stop borrowing, even if they wanted to. Remember Greece in 2008? When investors suddenly decided Greek bonds were too risky, they stopped lending. Greece couldn't borrow money anymore. What happened next was economic devastation. 1 in 4 public workers fired, wages fell 30%, and their entire economy shrank by 25%. The lesson was clear: stop borrowing, and your economy collapses. But keeping the borrowing machine running requires something crucial: confidence. As long as investors believe countries can pay them back, They'll keep lending. The moment that confidence cracks, interest rates spike, making debt even more expensive. And this is where things get dangerous. When countries owe money in their own currency, they have one last escape hatch: inflation. They can essentially print their way out of debt by making their currency worth less, so old debts become easier to pay back with cheaper money. It's like taking out a mortgage in 1970 for $24,000, an amount that seemed enormous then, but looks laughably small today because of inflation. The same house that cost $24,000 in 1970 sells for nearly $500,000 today. Some economists argue this is exactly what will happen with today's debt. Governments will gradually inflate away their obligations, making trillion-dollar debts feel manageable in tomorrow's money. But there's a problem with this strategy. It requires perfect timing and control. Too little inflation, and the debt burden remains crushing. Too much inflation, and you get social unrest, economic chaos, and potential currency collapse. We're essentially playing a global game of financial chicken, where everyone is betting they can keep the system running just a little bit longer. When the music stops. So what happens if this all falls apart? The warning signs are already visible. Bond vigilantes, investors who refuse to buy government debt they consider risky, have started flexing their muscles. Remember when UK Prime Minister Liz Truss tried to cut taxes without cutting spending? Bond markets revolted within days, driving borrowing costs through the roof and forcing her to resign. That was a preview of what happens when the global debt machine breaks down. But the real danger isn't any single country defaulting. It's the interconnected nature of the entire system. When banks in one country hold bonds from another country, and pension funds are invested in those banks, and insurance companies are invested in those pension funds, a collapse anywhere can trigger a cascade everywhere. Think of it like a massive game of Jenga, where every country is both holding up the tower and depending on it for support. Pull out the wrong piece, and the whole structure comes down. Some experts believe we're approaching the point where the mathematics simply don't work anymore. The Congressional Budget Office projects US debt will grow from 99% of GDP today to 122% by 2034. Interest payments alone could consume 25% of all government revenues. At some point, something has to give. Either bond investors accept terrible returns just to keep the system running, or governments massively cut spending, or the whole thing resets through inflation, default, or economic collapse. But here's the strangest part of all. Despite owing $300 trillion globally, the world's total assets are worth over $1 quadrillion. We're not actually broke. We're just terribly organized. The question isn't whether we can pay off government debt, it's whether we can survive the addiction to it. Every day we delay real solutions, the problem gets bigger, the risks get higher, and the eventual reckoning gets more severe. But understanding how this system works is the first step toward fixing it, because the biggest threat isn't the debt itself. It's the illusion that this can continue forever. What do you think happens next? Let us know in the comments below.